Hello, Sam.
Hey Doug,
How are you doing?
I got some sleep last night. Previous night I got 2 hours, so I crashed most of solstice day.
Yank. Yeah, I've been sleeping a lot too.
Well, it is darker mostly these days.
Yep. Hello, Jazz. We're officially on. And love to welcome Anna, love to invite check-ins on what for me is a temperate, sunny, beautiful Sunday. Anyone? No one? Someone? No takers, huh?
It's Sunday, beautiful sunset, had a restful day. That's about it. Complete.
Good morning, early afternoon. I feel like I feel a little bit uneasy today. Um, the holidays are here. I really don't have any major plans like I used to. It's sort of just skipping over me. And for the most part, I'm okay with that. The only good thing that I've noticed online, though, and maybe it's not a good thing, is that I see a little bit more people from opposite sides at least engaging in discussion. Not that anybody's minds are being changed, but slowly little groups of 2 to 2 or 1 and 2 are starting to speak. So that gives me some hope. I'm complete.
Anna, we're doing check-ins. Alex, welcome.
You're muted, Doug.
Heiner, is that your voice checking in? Yes.
I can check in with just what happens to be on my mind at the moment. What I was thinking about just before I connected. I was thinking about being and how there is our everyday experience of being, which is taken up with all the worries and things to do and lists and keeping on time and sort of keeping these balls juggling in the air and keeping our lives going somehow. And then there is another experience of being, which doesn't really have any connection with all that stuff that we think our lives are made up of. It's a bit what Alex called unity consciousness. I think I would agree. An experience of being which is complete in itself and has no needs, and it just is the pure experience of being, the I am of just being. Very simple, and I think in one way or another, we're all looking to experience that, like a child, like a baby. We recognize it in babies or even in animals. I've been recognizing it in flies, little teeny flies that have been circling around. I think it's because I brought in a plant that had flies on it. And somehow I get that feeling of pure being from these little flies. So that's just what happens to be in my mind at the moment. Complete.
I think Heiner's working out his connectivity. Alex, you there?
That's Sam.
Hey, Sam. Want to check in?
Man, so much has been happening. Let's see. My daughter went to California yesterday, right after I returned from California. So, in a span of 47 or 48 hours, I was at the airport 3 times. So that's why yesterday I was not able to get on the barn raising very much because I'd only had 2 hours of sleep. So I ended up sleeping most of Solstice Day. Felt like I took a nap and it was dark again. Um, and I have a lot that got stirred up by Anna's share, but I will save that till later on in the actual discussion. The other thing I'm really enjoying is that I continue on this quest to really dig deep into um, a lot of history at the company, which turns out to be hopefully somewhat valuable. So it's getting me back into the making, the changing, the shaping of things in a cyber way, nothing physical, nothing material. So I'm having fun learning that, and it always feels somewhat slow, but I'm still back into it and really enjoying that. Other than that, I'm going to be visiting another friend this morning, taking a puppy there because she's interested in adopting a puppy, and she's bringing a friend of hers. So we'll see about having 2 puppies adopted hopefully soon. So that's going to occupy my day today. Checking in for now. Over.
Rainer, do we have you? Or not yet? I assume that silence means not yet. Alex? I know you said, wait, you threw something in the chat, didn't you?
He said he was making
Uh,
coffee.
Stay on mute because the neighbors, what? Neighbors trying to sleep, making coffee.
Oh,
Did you check in, Doug?
I sort of did. It's a sunny day. It's not too cold, which is nice. And I don't know, I feel like I spent the last week sleeping. Um, and today I'm finally beginning to feel like there's a small emergence of vitality and energy. And and I resonate, Anna, with what you shared. I definitely, I think we sort of got into it a little bit on Thursday's call, that there are these different layers and facets of being. And there's like the unity being in the moment, and there's the human being doing, and then there's incoming, and then there's the expressive outputting part, and all of that's going on at the same time. And it can be really easy to lose the track and thread over which one is operating when, how, and why. And is it by choice or is it by reflex? All of that stuff. So that resonates for me. Figuring out how to be on top of it, not keep up with it, but be on top of it. Alex, does this mean you're with us? Any check-in for us? How are you staying cool down there, by the way? It seems like the whole country is either broiling or burning or boiling.
I have a fan. I've got 2 fans. But it's 32 degrees on my inside thermometer. So it could be hotter at the airport, I don't know. But it's certainly tropical. And as soon as this session's over, my shirt will be off again straight away. But the energy is also in the community, in the conversation, and in the desire for change of some description. And that doesn't come about unless people unite. And put this political pressure on the legislation creators. And we can do that. It's not as easy as it sounds. It can be done. I've seen it done many times. And with the new technology we have today, it should be a much simpler thing to do. There's apps you can get, but they got security issues, but they're getting over those security issues as well. People using security with crypto encryption, hashtag hashing, cryptology. So that's good because that allows the truther networks to confirm the results of polls and things like that. They can confirm they haven't been hacked. So there are good developments, I think. And I'll leave it at that. I've got to stay quiet as I can because my neighbours are sleeping. So I'll leave it at that for now. Over.
Did I miss Jazz's check-in?
I'm just watching the gentle sunset. It's 4:20 near enough. It's cloudy. It's a warm day considering it's 2/3 past December and it's solstice today. Shortest day of the year for us. Longest for Alex. I resonate with what you've said, but I'm waiting for you to clarify, go into details, rather than give you my input, which is of no importance really. My input, it's your input that's important. So I'm all good here, Anna. Thanks for asking. Complete.
I heard that girl, Marianne Williamson. I think it was Marianne Williamson. She's saying playing small doesn't serve the world. You have to display your superpowers and go for it, because you're on high moral ground and you've got a task to accomplish. You've set your goals and you can head for them. That's the way to go with people who desire to achieve that thing they set out to achieve. Over.
Well, I'll just retort to that one. That's a good book. The gibberish I've been growing up with, late, very recent, in a few days. I'm questioning all of that as well, considering we are getting movement to the right and the politicians are using subliminal language. Now, who'd have thought of that one?
I do think that it's very easy to get depressed if we're relying on the outside world to do something to cheer us up. If we're relying on the outside world or people in the outside world to behave in ways that we want them to, which is why I was thinking about this being that there is a source inside us to experience a complete feeling of love and happiness. But it does entail in some way leaving aside the things of this world. Otherwise, we are constantly feeling dissatisfied with the way things are. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't actually put any effort into changing things, which is what Alex was talking about. I think we naturally do that when we feel that there's something that needs to change. But if it comes from that place of constant dissatisfaction, then it's unlikely that it will give us what we think we need. That's why I was feeling that, yes, Stacey, you carry on.
No, I was just going to say that I think that that's like a default that we've gotten used to doing, focusing on what's not working and trying to change that instead of focusing on what is working and trying to get more of that. I think as long as we're in body, I don't think we're meant to separate those two. I think somehow we're supposed to be trying to find a way to blend with that real essence of who we are. And if I could share, I didn't share it before because I wasn't ready, but I had a very personal experience yesterday. In May, it will be 5 years since I asked for a divorce. And I think I just got closure yesterday after having a conversation with my ex that we hardly speak at all. But at the end of the conversation, I really, truly recognized that I had fallen in love with his inner child that he abandoned long ago. And that child was gone. And something just shifted. And instead of going into all the stories of what could have been and taking that default route of how sad it is it didn't work and this, that, and the other thing, something just shifted where I just recognized that I had gained new insight and there was a reason and, where the next step is. And so I think that as a society, we tend to be crisis oriented. Until there's an impending crisis, we'll just sit and relax. And I think if we learn to flip that, it would go a long way. And just to say one more thing, it's sometimes difficult because sometimes people will see something as a criticism when it's really meant to be an enhancement. And to go to, I think, what Alex said and Marianne Williamson, part of that embracing of who you really are means that you show up. And at least for me, that if I have something to say that I think can add, I shouldn't worry about how I'm going to come off and how I'm going to be viewed. That's who I am. That's a part of me, and I need to express that. And I'm complete.
So just one thought about some of the shares that have been riffed. It seems to me from Anna's initial check-in, it seems that people whom I respect through the ages have been pointing to trying to be that person in daily life, not separate, not to be sitting meditating and thinking, oh, that's nirvana, but to be sitting and meditating in your own body as you're, as they said, chopping wood, carrying water, going through daily life. So there doesn't have to be this distinction. And I think part of what I'm lucky enough to experience living pretty much by myself now for the next 9 days, and mostly by myself, except with Veronica, is that I get to watch myself think as I try and go through daily life and feel. And that's why, to me, even picking up the dog's poop, doing the laundry, doing the dishes is not an absence of that being. In fact, it's really sinking into that being and enjoying that life. It's not a separation for me, or at least it isn't mostly. And I think that there's this trick of words that says it's either this or that. And I think that's a trap. We can get out of that trap very easily. We have to recognize that I think that these words are traps. And that's why, to me, these words are useful when we lean into them and really try and see the intent and feel the intent behind them. But if we just play with the semantics of words, we can always find a disagreement. We can always find a duality. There's the trap. In fact, I think that might be the Tower of Babel problem. Over.
Maybe I pop in here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me, I had some bandwidth and garbling problems, but the line seems to be stable now. I'm just relaxing and I fully resonate with you, Sam. It is this swimming and not just meditating. Count Durkheim, the Zen master from Germany, was saying. So I feel it is really the integration and going beyond the dualities and the exact meaning of words. That's my drive. I'm still trying to catch up, but I just wanted to tell you that I like to see parts of the family. I wonder where the rest is. And if we can do some joint meditations and walking through the woods in the next days, even when remote.
I agree with you, Sam, too, that if we can bring these two together, that is the ideal, you could say. But I think in order to do that, we also have to recognize that they are different to some extent. We need to be able to see, because in our general life, we are completely taken up in general. I mean, perhaps not the people on this, in this discussion group, but I think in general in the world, people are completely taken up with their day-to-day living problems. And for them to have even time to be able to think about their thoughts and to begin to think, is this thought a beneficial thought or not? You know, is this something that I want to be thinking, or can I be thinking something else which will be more helpful to me? I think that you know, when you're, for example, picking up the dog poo, and you can embrace that as part of your life in a way that doesn't make any distinction between that and your inner purity, if you like. I think that's unusual, and it's lovely that you can do that. And we can actually use everything like that. Everything is an opportunity given to us to really affirm that inner, whatever we want to call it, completion or purity, you know, or understanding. I'm complete.
Can I just go first, Sam, before I forget my point? I think the way we start to learn how to do that is to look at emotions as signals rather than use them as like the backdrop of what we're going through. And if we look at it as a signal, automatically it's going to separate the wholeness of who we are from what's going on the outside. But at the same time, it's addressing a big part of who we are that's a part of what does keep us separate. So I think that's an important thing to learn how to start doing.
Let me share a couple of thoughts. They don't sound directly related to what you just said, Anna. And by the way, I do appreciate some of that reflection. But I was in a Tai Chi class one day, and it took a long time. It took years, actually, before I started understanding circles. That all movement, when smooth, when flowing, is basically just connecting circles with circles and shifting from one circle to another circle. And at one time, I was very, very blocked, you could say, in understanding one particular move because I said, I can't figure out where the circle goes from here. And the instructor said, sink into yourself, sink into the ground, sink into the earth, because that's where the circle can continue and then come out the other side. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I practiced the sinking into, actually, it's the very first thing you learn in Tai Chi, which is how to sink into your legs, into the earth, etc. But in so-called learning the second, third, fourth things, you sort of forget the first, so often. But if I go back to that and think, okay, how can I make the circle continue? It made sense. And I don't know why it came up right now, but I think it's in this notion that if you lose sense of that continuity in going through daily life, sorry, there's a light backdrop there, then I think there is a parallel or mirror sinking. It's in a sense coming deeper into that self, that beingness that you're talking about, Anna, in order to come back out and then re-engage and then be back in flow with real life or outside, external life. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting parallel. The second thought I'd like to share is one of the big reasons I came to unblocking, and in fact have been coming to unblocking for years, is to try and understand when we are dealing with others in a way that does not feel familiar to me. And the biggest way that is unfamiliar to me, even though I've spent years trying to understand it, is people dealing with or recovering from or suffering from severe PTSD. When someone is suffering or dealing with severe PTSD, the ways you and I speak here and engage and interact and appreciate and flow doesn't happen. And it's very difficult for me to understand what that experience is like from inside that PTSD. And I'm always constantly trying to come outside myself to put myself in that other perspective. And it's so fucking difficult that even I find the limits of my own generosity and my own patience and my own quote unquote beingness, my own quote unquote enlightenment. I know my limits. I've pushed up against them so many times. And yet I still try to go beyond that. And it gets harder and harder and harder. So I'm curious, when we're interacting or communicating or engaging or just living with someone, let's quote unquote say a regular or normal or functioning person who is able to engage in conversations like this, it is a very different world to engage in someone who is suffering from PTSD. And it's that notion that I'm finding difficult to say, how can that stretch me, grow me, educate me, versus how is that now taking such a, and I think of it this way, an inordinate amount of time and patience and energy? And what are the lost opportunity costs? Or what is the new opportunity presenting itself to me right now? And I don't have answers. I'm looking for others who have experienced this, or are going through, or have gone through this, or have seen this. But that's occupying a lot of my consciousness right now.
There's a sort of oblique analogy that was something that crossed my path this morning, actually, on NPR, that is relevant to this, maybe. For some reason, I seem to have drifted in my coaching work, drifted into a lot of PTSD folk. But there was a person, I think it was on the media, and there was a person speaking about how the media fell prey to a syndrome in the face of all of the criticism that was directed at it by the sort of extreme right world, an alt-fact world. That the media, in reaction, shifted its center into everything being this fairness balancing of 2 points of view. Even if one of those 2 points of view was not an equivalency, was completely insane. But that it had to be presented in an equivalency way so they didn't come under the criticism or the scrutiny of being, quote, unfair. And that was one of the major victories of the right misinformation trend that's been going on now for a few years. And it's sort of the validation or equivalency approach to fake news and to all sorts of really insane conspiracy stuff, all sorts of crazy shit that should have just been called out for what it was, instead of given this equal time energy. And so how does that bear any relevance to what you just shared? So the phenomenology, at least for me, as far as I understand it, of the folks that I work with, is that they effectively have a glitch, a sticking point in their operating system that snaps them back to whatever the initial trauma was. They're going through their day, and then all of a sudden something will trigger a revisitation, and they're back wherever they were when the initial trauma hit. And it triggers all of the programming and subroutines they wrote in that moment, but not contextualized. It's in the present, and it's with different place, different people, different time. But the responses, the reactivity, and all the things they're experiencing are not of here and now, this moment. They're of then. And they have no control over that mechanism. It happens, it's not unconsciously, it happens subconsciously. And so there are a lot of really interesting, fascinating sort of paths of orientation treatment in response to this that are being explored and evolved, because it's really challenging and nobody has really hard answers. And a colleague of mine in Israel who did a lot of this with the Israeli army vets, and a lot of his colleagues, there was a school of thought for an extended period of time to go back, to take the person back and to sort of rewrite the history and loosen up the glitch, loosen the grip of whatever locked in the triggering sense memory block mechanism. And that you had to spend time and go back to the original event in order to do that. And a lot of people are coming to the conclusion that that actually wasn't helpful, constructive. That the more effective strategy is to override and replace that with new program, and to really focus on taking the person into life today, context today, into the present, and have them begin to sort of squeeze out the room and the time and the opportunity for the old stuff to inject itself and intrude itself and impose itself on the present. And then there are folks that are like, you know, pointing toward stuff McKenna knew 20, 30 years ago. You know, ayahuasca and hallucinogens have also shown to have some amazing healing capacity at loosening up the grip of the glitch and enabling people to release it. So coming at it for you, and Anna, I see your finger. I'll be done shortly. Coming at it from your perspective and with stuff that you've shared over time, it's not an equivalency dynamic where you're putting yourself in somebody else's PTSD triggered shoes serves either them or you. Because in a strange sort of way, it would be doubling down or compounding whatever it is they're being triggered into. Whereas your being not in that space would be more likely, I would think, to provide the anchor for what's real, what's true, what's present, what's now. And that doesn't mean you don't have to be empathetic. It doesn't mean you don't have to be supportive. It doesn't mean you can't come from love. But the idea of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, literally, experientially, as a way of helping, in this context, I don't think, makes a lot of sense or offers a constructive solve for either you or for them. So for what all of that's worth, and I'm complete. Hannah?
So I have an example of this, and I think it's similar to what you're experiencing. I have this relationship with my sister, and most of our lives we have been at loggerheads, but recently we've been getting on a lot better. And last week we FaceTime every Sunday morning, and last week we had a really good session where we really connected. And at the end of it, it was about the fact that she was not sleeping at night, and she was waking up in a sort of panic state. And we talked about that, and it seemed very helpful to her. She wrote to me and said, I had a perfect night's sleep, slept like a log, and thanked me and, sort of blew me kisses. I mean, something very unusual for her. This morning we FaceTimed and we're straight back to square one again. And she is talking about how she wakes up in the night in a panic. She has this feeling, and this is something that another person that she talks to about this has put into language for her. She said it really felt absolutely spot on. He says that she feels like she's forgotten. Her experience is that nobody remembers her. When she wakes up, she doesn't exist. So she's in a panic. And she connects that with going to boarding school during the war. She was fairly young, as I was. And we talked about the fact that her experience is actually different from the reality. She knows that. She knows that she wasn't forgotten, that she isn't forgotten, but her experience is that she is forgotten. And when she wakes up, that gets triggered, and she's been advised to go and put water on her face and somehow bring herself back to the reality of where she is in order to give her a context of where she is, rather than being so immersed in this past trauma that she can't lift herself out of it. So I offer that as an example of when I got off the phone from her, I was feeling, what a shame that we hadn't somehow built on our previous connection the week before, that we'd gone right back to the beginning again, almost as though that had never happened. And it's sort of connected with what I was saying about how we get disappointed because people don't behave in the way we would like them to behave. And if our feeling of ourselves, our assessment of ourselves, or our experience of ourselves is based on whether other people behave in the way that we would like them to behave, we're probably going to experience a lot of disappointment. And there's the necessity to get to that other experience of being where we are complete and whole and not needy, because there is that wholeness which can revitalize. And that's our nourishment. That's where, we can come back feeling, oh, okay, I'll try again next time. Or I won't. I mean, it's up to us. There's no one, I might give up. Who knows? It's a choice that we make. I'm complete.
Thank you both, Doug and Anna. May I speak?
Sure.
Doug, I think I 99% agree with you. The 1% is that without really communicating that the empathy, you use the word empathy, okay? Without being able to get that empathy across to the other person, that other person finds it extremely difficult to trust. And when there isn't that trust, I feel very ineffective and unhelpful. And if I spend hours and hours and hours and then end up feeling ineffective and unhelpful, then my mind goes to, well, this is not good for you, this is not good for me. So why continue? And that trust is very hard to attain, because people that have gone through this kind of PTSD, one of the difficulties is it's very hard to trust again. And that is such a loss, because almost any interaction, if it's going to go anywhere interesting and deep and, etc., if it's going to go anywhere other than the superficial, requires some level of trust. And it's such a loss to think that people who have gone through this PTSD cannot have these rich experiences or cannot let themselves engage in such a way, because that trust is so impossible to regain. So I know and I believe what you say, Doug, but what I don't understand is where that trust, other than in a superficial way, can be reestablished. And I'm not saying for myself, I'm saying for people who've gone through PTSD. And if I then say, okay, I'm going my own way, it's now, in a sense, saying, you're lost. I can't help you. And that's such a sad thing to say. Because right behind that notion is, I can't help you and no one else can help you. That is a judgment, but it's based on an investment of, I mean, in this case, years, hundreds, if not thousands of hours. Anyway, that's why I think that's still 1% that I don't understand there. Because 99%, I'm completely there with you. Because I've been through so many attempts and so many counselors and so many books. And yet there's still that difficulty in reestablishing trust. Anyway, I've spoken too much. I have something to add to what Anna just said, but I'll stop short for now.
You know, there's, especially in young people, trauma can cause changes in the brain structure, the brain development. I wouldn't call it brain damage, I'd call it just, it's a change. Something changes because of the trauma, especially during the childhood, early years of development. But in adults, recovery is possible when they're encouraged by peers and other people to do the self-development training. It's a long, slow process in many cases. But the idea that a person is the master of their own destiny has to be hammered into their thick skull. Because if they catch on to that fact, that they are the master of their own destiny, then the advice to do and continue with the program of self-development might have some more effect, a greater effect. And that applies to the people who treat them as much as it applies to the people being treated, I think. But that's only my opinion. And you can lead a horse to water.
So Sam, I don't know your situation specifically, so I want to talk more generally. But at first, I got a little triggered, because to be honest, I feel like I have some PTSD. I wouldn't add the D because I don't think it's a disorder, because I think I do pretty well in controlling that when I interact with other people. But it's there, and in my alone time, it comes out and I have to deal with it. That being said, what I know about trust, having worked with substance abusers in group situations, is that it's easier for us to trust somebody that allows themselves to be vulnerable too. So if I'm talking to somebody that just thinks they have it all together and this is all about me, my guard's going to be up. But when I'm able to hear somebody else's vulnerability and recognize that this is, there's more than what's affecting me going on, there's more than what's affecting that other person's going on. It's just a different situation. And I can't put everything I want to say into words, but I've dealt with people that have worse, that really act out of their trauma. And in those situations, the best I really could do is step back, give them a lot of space, but at the right time, share where my vulnerability was coming from. So again, I don't know your particular situation, but I think just in general, you know, the more we let people see of us, the easier it is for them to, you know, put down their guards and maybe look at themselves and complete.
I love you, Tracy. Stacy, I should say.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that was really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, at the risk of speaking out of order, I really do appreciate that, Stacy. I recognize that that could apply to me because one of the things that I try to be clear about, which I think works with people like, sorry, which I think mostly works, is this setting boundaries idea. So if I'm clear with my boundaries and what I will accept and what I will not accept, that does appear quite a bit, I think, like that the difficult situation you just described, Stacey. In other words, if I'm less clear, if I'm more malleable about these boundaries, if I'm more quote unquote understanding, then I think I could probably encourage more that trust. But these boundaries are so clear. And there's a part of me that says so necessary, especially when it comes to, affecting what I'm experiencing with my kids, that it does look very absolute. It does look difficult to change. And yet I still understand what it is you're saying. I'm gonna have to figure out how to apply that in this case. But that was very useful. Thank you, Stacey. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say in response to Anna was this whole notion about whether or not she experiences the same conversation the following week. One of the very, very clear symptoms of PTSD is this triggering, which looks like an absence of short-term memory, maybe even an absence of medium-term memory. Is that we seem to have the same conversation and go through the same topic and go through the same cycle over and over and over again. And it takes some of that before that memory comes back, literally. I'll give you one example. For example, some of you know I'm talking about my girlfriend, who may or may not be a girlfriend, depending on the conversation we had last night. At some point, this is months ago, there were 2 bags of clothes, completely unfamiliar clothes, that appeared in the guest room where, she's got a bunch of her stuff. And so her first reaction was, who have you been having over here? How come there are all these strange clothes out here? And I said, I don't know. There's only 2 other people that have keys, So you got one, she's got one, my daughter has one. These other 2 people are not likely to bring clothes of this kind and dump them in your room. The room where she's got a lot of her stuff. And yet for months, she was saying, there's something you're not telling me, go ask your daughter, how come she did this, how come you went out and got some clothes and dumped them in my room? And then only last week did she finally remember that her boss's wife had given her 2 bags of clothes. And she evidently brought them over, dumped them on the bed, forgot about them, because subsequently she kept saying, hey, how come this fits? How come this is so nice? How come this is actually usable? Blah, blah, blah. And then only last week, this is after months of these accusations, could she then say, oh, yes, I remember. I brought them over. I forgot. Sorry. That's how extreme this short-term memory loss can be. And yet it still causes lots of damage in the meantime, because it fuels this accusation, this blame, this negative thinking, this what if. Yeah, it's deadly in many ways. Over.
The most difficult thing is when you feel that your stance is justified by what the other person does. I mean, here you've given an example which is so foolproof, everybody has to say, oh, well, you know, no wonder you think like that, because if she goes on like that, you know, that's one of the most difficult things to manage, is when the person that you're trying to relate to, and I think what Doug was talking about was sort of separating the person from their whole belief system. So if you can empathize with the person and somehow not empathize with the belief system, so you don't get drawn into it to sort of reaffirm it, but you're still feeling love for that person. And that's the most difficult thing, is to separate out the person from their belief system. And of course, the example that you've given, it's so difficult to separate out. When she does things that totally justify your response. I mean, you know, it's a huge challenge. I'm not saying in any way that this is easy or that you should be able to do it. Yeah, Stacy.
Well, I like that question. Should I be able to do this? That is the question I ask myself. Sorry, Stacey.
Right.
Well, that's okay, because I don't, I know there's a history here, so I want to like throw the history away and pretend that this was just an example, a one-time thing. Because the first thought that came to me, like if somebody said, there's these bags here, if I didn't feel like I was being accused, the way it seemed to me you felt like you were being accused, like who did you have over? My first response would have been like, oh my God, I don't know, how'd that get there? I would have immediately bonded with, like, we would have been together. And I think that would have made her feel better, and you could have gone.
Yes, yes. And I did do that. And yet this accusation and negative and blaming still appears later.
But I heard you say that your response to her was, only these people have keys.
Yeah, that was
to
later.
me.
That was a later conversation.
Okay, because to me it sounded like you were like, you must be crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. Instead of let's solve this mystery. Oh my goodness.
No, in fact, I've got so used to her lack of memory that that was actually my first response. But you know, after she said, no, it can't be, you know, then later on, subsequent conversations, and we have many conversations about this, you know, went through all of this numbers of keys business. But my very first response was, you know, you probably forgot. But that wasn't enough. You know?
I think Stacy's right in it's so difficult because you have a history. And through that history, you have a perception of understanding who she is. And, you know, it's inevitable that you slot her, as I do with my sister, slot her into, you know, when I feel she's being, I interpret something that she's saying as being hostile or attacking, when it could just be concern or, you know, it's because we carry this past with us. So we don't see the person as they are. We see our interpretation of this story that we've carried with us. And I mean, it is such a challenge, huge.
I think part of it is when somebody we look up to or have emotions for, have respect for, is not living up to our expectations. And it's a tragic loss. It feels like a tragic loss for us experiencing that. But it's all part of life. We don't own other people, and quite often we have trouble getting them to change to suit what we want. It's often quite a challenging task to let go. But letting go can also be a freeing process for yourself and can lead to new solutions. Over.
I tend to go toward the boundary thing that you were raising. And it's really easy to confuse your own hidden goals, your own hidden shadows with these situations, because we also cast people in our lives to affirm beliefs and things that we are carrying around. And that can include setting myself up, in a no-win, because my belief is I'm a no-win. That if I'm not good enough, if my love and support and all that stuff isn't sufficient to fix it, and that's my truth, then I'm going to cast somebody in my life for whom, no matter how much love, attention, empathy, and accommodation I make, it's going to roll off their back like water off a duck's back. And I can remember, a relationship long before I was married with a woman that, on one level broke my heart, and on the other hand, looking back, was a complete setup for me to affirm just what I described. And when it was over, the truth is I was shed from her life as easily as everything else while we were in the relationship was shed from her life. And that was who she was. And I had cast her in my play to serve my purpose, which was to affirm, not good enough. My best efforts are never going to close the deal. And so unpacking that stuff and figuring out the part that's under your control and has to do with you versus the part that's under their control and has to do with them is really key. And if her belief system is that the world is an untrustworthy place, then no matter where she is, who she's with, or what she's doing in her life, she's going to make take actions, and set things up to affirm that belief, unless and until she decides to change it. And the same conversely is true for you. And if there's a part of you that's about, being the quintessential healer fixer in the situation, that's a setup to affirm you're not good enough to really do that. But you don't give up, so you just keep at it as you wear down and pay the price for a mission in vain. And she remains seemingly and apparently unaffected by any and all of it. That's worth looking at. And I think the piece that Anna mentioned, which is separating love for the person from awareness of their belief system, and separating those two things out. I think there's choice at the base of that, which is I can choose to love somebody who's, materially seriously challenged and will be for the rest of their lives. And it means I will never be trusted. I will never experience this or that or a dozen other things that would normally be there in a relationship between two whole, healthy, intact, and well-balanced human beings. And I can make the choice to be in that relationship, recognizing and accepting that my partner has some material deficiencies. And, you know, my nephew just got married recently. And he comes from a family with a father who's a police chief, whose whole life is devoted to looking good and keeping secrets and never, ever, ever showing anything other than perfect and all this stuff. And so my nephew reactively married, you know, somebody completely unsuitable and wrong side of the tracks and just full of all sorts of psychological and emotional challenges. Just breathtaking in scope. And like couldn't have picked somebody more calculated actually to irritate the crap out of his parents. But I watch him with his wife. And he's got his own demons and challenges, and you know, everybody has their counterpart. And he is just unbelievably emphatic, clear, sotto voce, grounded with setting boundaries. Like his wife wants to do something completely insane or is out of her mind and being reactive about something, and she's in the middle of it, and she'll say something, and he's like, "No, like that's not going to happen." and that's their relationship. Like that's what it's going to be. But he clearly loves her and has no problem just being really clear and straightforward and emphatic about boundaries in terms of the degree to which her insanity, her expression, manifestation, and projection of insanity will be allowed to manifest in their life, their home life, in relation to their daughter they just had, in relation to his life. It's just really clear, as a matter of fact. And it may, you know, she may stop immediately and she may take a day and a half to cool down, and she may, you know, take 6 hours to, you know, go to her mom's and then come back from her mom's, which is a pattern that, you know, spans 6 years. And it's all okay. It's all like even straight. And I think that's about separating the insanity from the person and going, I love this person. I could live without their insanity, but I accept their insanity. Like I make a choice to be with them even in the face of. And if you sort of get that gestalt, then you also realize everybody's in that bucket. It's just not quite so dramatic. But everybody in every relationship is doing that if they're still in the relationship to greater or lesser extents. It's just some people are more extreme than others, and I'm complete.
So what you just said resonates with my no abandonment theme, which I think I've mentioned many times before. The limits that I'm testing in myself are when this starts taking 5 hours a day, 7 hours a day, then is that enough? 2, 3 even was difficult. So that's where I'm bumping up against the limits of some of the stuff that's being, I mean, rightfully so, discussed here.
The only counsel I give is judgment has no role to play. It's just choice. So you reach your limit, you reach your limit. You call it a day, you pull the plug. You don't reach your limit, you don't reach your limit, you stay in it. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. But it's not about, there are no rights or wrongs. There's no higher authority in your life. You're the God of your existence. You call the shots. And there's no judgment of you if and when you were, to get to a point where you say you're done, then that's not a blame or fault or failure on your part. That's you deciding you're done. Um, and that's as much advice as I'll offer.
I would suggest a relationship counsellor. You need one. But, well, she might benefit, but both of you would probably benefit from a professional relationship counsellor after a few sessions over.
Yeah, clearly that is the case. Just so you know that I'm not dismissing it, we've been trying to do so, and her life and schedule is so unpredictable, and that she has been having trouble prioritizing to find the time, to nail down the time, to make that appointment, to actually go to that appointment, etc. So yeah, even arranging that is difficult, knowing that that would be a good step to take. Thanks.
Hi, Josh. You want to check in?
I'm just listening. I don't really have much to say.
I've got some bad news about the fires in Australia. It looks like a lot of them were started from lightning strikes in areas where there's a lot of methane. It's areas where they've been fracking for gas. So that's caused a record number of fires. Over.
Sorry, Alex.
Do they think they would have been less severe were they not fracking in those areas? They saying the fracking actually exacerbated the intensity and the spread.
Yeah, but it looks like without the methane, there would still have been fires, but not as many. So it's exacerbated exactly. I mean, what else could it be? It's the temperature's got a part to play with it as well because the place is so dry. We've had years of drought. So clearly there's animals, fires, lightning strikes, and careless backpackers. Over.
Sort of an analog to that in California with the fires, that not this year as much as, but last year, where the exponential rate of spread, as it turns out, was because the power company hadn't turned off the power grid, and so their transformers exploding literally acted like a fuse, just lighting whole territories afire. And if they had just turned off the grid, it would have been much less damaging and spread much slower.
I'll just share with you, Doug. I was walking through the forest yesterday and just looking at the cold time, so all the leaves are gone. So all the dry brush just stands out like a sore thumb. You could just see all the. We had probably about 30 trees that just came down in a windstorm, and it's windy right now. And at least in the forest that I'm in, it's just a natural thing. It's mostly pine. So the pine trees, a lot of bark beetle got into them and ate them, and they're dry and dead. And then a lot of it is just natural. I'm looking at the trees, they just have a life cycle where they can only grow so big before they're almost like choked out and they die because the new root systems are coming up. And managing forests is really an interesting task. Like I was just walking around thinking, okay, I need to buy an ATV because after I pile up all this wood, it's going to have to be burned. And if I burn it in this spot, I could catch the whole forest on fire. So I've got to move it to a spot where it's safe to burn. And that's for 12 years now. That's been the job up here is every winter when we get rain and it gets wet, we pick a spot and we try not to burn down the forest when we do the brush burns. And there was one of the first ones I did, I wasn't that experienced, and the flames were getting so high, it burned and singed a live, healthy tree. And we were all like, oh no, this tree. And so I've been watching that tree for 8 years and it's fully come back 100%, but I burned the whole side of that tree from the heat. I didn't even realize I was so close. And so since then, we've dug a giant, massive hole in the area that all the trees fell to create a burn area. But sometimes it's just too much work the branches, you have to tie them in a bundle and put a rope around them and physically pull that bundle over to that area. And then, can you get the water to the place that you're doing the fire? So every time we do a fire, we just did one a couple weeks ago, and I was 99% sure it was 100% out. And it wasn't. It was actually burning in the corner of the fire. I had poured buckets on it, but I missed a corner. And we have a situation up here we call the miracle burn, where my mom and my stepdad did the burn, covered it in dirt. It was under the ground, and they left. They were sure, they had buried it. It was completely underground. And they came back the following week, and it had climbed up out of the ground and burned the whole area around it and then died out. So it was a miracle that we didn't set the whole forest on fire, because it's so challenging. I even did a video about doing a large burn. It's like dealing with a wild tiger, because you can't look directly at it and you can't turn your back on it, because the minute you turn your back on it, wind will whip up and the flame will come at you. And it's really a living creature, the fire. And you hear stories about in the big fire that happened 2 years ago that burnt all of Ventura, Santa Barbara, and Ojai, that huge fire that just went across for a week and a half and spread all the way up. It was right near St. Thomas Aquinas. It's a school. There was that transformer that did that. And, they sued the company. And to me, I think what really happens, what's the reality of systems is they went from being a public utility to a private utility, and being private, they push things to the endangerment of the public. And with the recent, this last year, they did turn off certain power grids in areas, but the entire restructuring of all of our systems needs to change. We all know this, but how do you do that when the change is so huge? And I deal with that every day homesteading up here. We know we need to put in about a $4,000 to $5,000 plumbing system, but the credit cards are maxed out. We're swimming in the debt of just trying to build this place and just trying to afford to keep the truck going. Can we afford a $5,000 plumbing system? No, we can't. So we just have to deal with broken pipes, and that's sort of, I think, the problem in all of the world is it's going to cost about, $50 billion to create a safe nuclear reactor. with the new technologies of thorium, et cetera, and even then, do we know that we can actually build a safe nuclear reactor? We haven't done it in the past. Can we do it now? Can we build all this infrastructure? And if you relay that to emotions and feelings and everything we're talking about, can we build the trust that we want in humanity when we haven't had the transparency that we've craved for years? Like when we haven't had the trust in each other, can we build that transparency and trust? I mean, trust, I just think it all comes down to trust. I think it comes down to trust that when things go wrong, are we in it together or are we separate? And that's what I'm learning up here, is to tell my mom and my stepdad, we're in it together. Like, we've been doing this for 12 years. It's not just you staying up at night wondering if we're going to burn down the forest. It's me too. Like, I don't want to burn down the forest. Like, I'm going to go get some buckets of water and put that fire out, and just trusting that we're all in this together. And just same thing with the GCC, you know, we're just trusting that it's not just Sam showing up or just Anna showing up. It's all of us showing up. We're in this together. Whatever this conversation is, we're having it together. So leaning into that, and I think what Stacy said earlier too about vulnerability, you can't have trust without vulnerability. You just can't. If you're pretending to be so strong and tough, you're not going to be trusted. So that's my 2 cents for the conversation today. Thank you for letting me share.
Can I say, Hannah, are you speaking? Your mic's not working. Just wanted to mention the nuclear power stations require so much cement that it takes 30 or 40 years before they recoup the amount of carbon produced in the construction. That doesn't include the operating carbon. So unless you build these nuclear power stations out of bamboo, it's going to be difficult to justify it. Over.
Well, I try now. Can you hear me? Okay. Josh, I was really intrigued hearing you talk. I was distracted because we have 3 permanent and 10 and more people coming in here and out, and there's so much turmoil and distraction. So I felt this calm situation you are having here would not be good, as I've done often, flying around town or other people jumping in and out. No, Josh, what you were just saying about your environment, I thought you are an eremit alone, but it looks like you're there as a family. And us speaking very personally and experience people having angst or trauma and how they handle it, how they cover it, and maybe making it even worse by using it as a weapon or going inside and getting lost and afraid and succumbing. All this is a very special thing that we are experiencing here now. I feel I very often don't have the time to tune in, but I do listen. This is what I wanted to say for the end of this great Christmas conversation.
Thank you, Hunter. And I just want to wish everybody, you know, it's a very special moment in time right now, at least in the stars. There's a solar eclipse, there's a meteor shower. It's the darkest time of the year, so the sun has gone down. Yesterday was winter solstice. Happy winter solstice. And it's that dark, dark time where the sun is at the lowest point in the sky. And we're about to go into a new year and a new decade. I mean, it's just so exciting. Like, we're going through that darkness. This is the darkest time right now in terms of the solar activity. but we're about to rise up. And there's an old saying that the story of Jesus comes from when the sun dips down into the sky and it stays there for 2, almost 3 days, and then rises back up and starts to get higher in the sky. And that was also equated in the ancient stories of Jesus that was pulled in, of rising back up, whether it be a human person or the sun, or just that understanding of energy, that we are about to go into a decade where we have more information, more possibilities than ever, and we can do whatever we want with it. I feel as optimistic as I am pessimistic, but I'm trying to be more realistic. I just talked to my friend that was at that COP25 conference that you were at, Heiner, and she afterwards flew to America, then flew back to Israel. And she's so optimistic about helping all these indigenous people that she met at the COP25. She's on a private WhatsApp with them. And, you know, she wants to help all these communities around the world. She's such a little sprite. Like I just said, you know, I'll help you build that community. And I just feel if we all just are helping each other, I mean, what can we not accomplish, you know? But all the old stuff from the past, I do think is dying out. I do feel like all the old ways of power over, I just watched the Kennedy Awards, the 42nd annual JFK award ceremony, and I almost threw up in my mouth. I was like, fuck these people, fuck these 1%ers. I hope they all die. I looked in the audience, it was like 99% white. I looked at the stage and it was like 100% black. And I was just like, oh, great, the blackies are helping the whiteys. I mean, I was just so angry. I don't know why. I lost my stuff.
I can relate. I resisted, but those judgments were like percolating.
I didn't want to feel that way because it was such beautiful culture and art. And it was, sorry, go ahead, Anna. I'm going to shut up.
Well, I want to come back to what you were saying about trust and vulnerability. That just seemed so important to me, what you were saying. And I think it's something to do with being able to say, I don't know. Because so much of our self-confidence is based on thinking that we know. And I think if we were more familiar with being, I mean, I was just trying to feel, where is that vulnerability? How would I express that vulnerability, which Stacy was talking about? I mean, it's so difficult to get hold of, to actually, I can see the necessity for it, but it's so difficult to, you know, how do I make myself vulnerable? Or how do I allow myself to be vulnerable? And I think it's something to do with, or at least one portal is to be aware of this not knowing, just to be aware that, you know, how, even when we think we know, we only know one little bit of something. All the other facets of it are hidden from us. So our knowledge is so limited in, you know, what your friend was saying about helping all these indigenous people, or great. I mean, you know, nothing wrong with wanting to help, wanting to share, but so much of what we do, well, it's also been motivated by profit. So even sharing and the helping has been clawing back more than is being given quite often. Sorry, Alex, you carry on.
I was just going to say, quite often I'll rush in, believe I've got some answers and trying to help, and I end up making the situation worse because I hadn't thought it through. And that was like, it's like sometimes that happens often. So often you have to take a step back and say, am I really thinking things through? Because I'm encountering errors all the time, making mistakes. But then again, that's a process of learning. If I didn't do that, I would learn nothing. So I just plod along and carry on along the journey because it's the process and I enjoy it. If I tread on somebody's toes because I believe that I'm never wrong, always right, and you've got to do it this way, then I'm making the biggest blunder of ever. Everyone's entitled to their own position and point of view. Over.
I would like to go back to your example of resilience, so that when something is burned, something new can evolve. This is what we had with the UN and the Resilience Lab, and we had all the indigenous there, from the Atacama in Chile, from Africa, from Asia, everywhere. So their strength, saying no and continuing, not looking for themselves, but being connected in tribal or societal or family structures, and not doing this psychotherapy reflection on, oh, how do I feel and how does the other feel about me, but just sticking their head out and doing great things. That was giving me a lot of hope. And many of these events we did in the UNFCCC Resilience Lab was really about this sign of hope with the people who are running the negotiations. And they are in frustration and dismay, you cannot believe it. So I'm still full of that, and I thank you for your example, Josh, and I have to call it a night.
Thank you, Hunter, and thank you for coming. Go ahead, Stacy.
I want to go back to what Anna said about one portal being that not knowing, because I think it's really important, because I think it is way bigger. You know, this the joke about men don't ask for directions. So clearly there's something there that it made it into, you know, popular folklore. But the thing is, that fear is an important one, because I think that that can hinder new ideas and new ways of doing things, and being able to take a chance and put out a new idea, because there is that fear of, if I'm wrong. And if you just, you know, like I think Heiner was suggesting, that you don't pay attention to, you know, all those things, then you're not going to push past what that fear might cause. So I think it's important that we know, at least individually, what makes us vulnerable, because hopefully we will be more aware of it and push ourselves a little bit further to not let that hold us back. I'm complete.
I was just going to share a big thing that just happened here in the States. I'm following the presidential campaign, and I'm a big fan of the Andrew Yang running for president. And I noticed a shift in the media this week. He was on a debate, and he started speaking about certain things that he sees that other people aren't talking about. And the media did something I didn't believe they would do, but they started being vulnerable and saying, we think we know what we're doing here at the media, but maybe we don't. Maybe we should listen to this guy, because he's actually on the ground talking to thousands of people every day. And they've started having him on their shows. He was just on, Andrew Yang was on Fox News, which is a separate viewpoint in America. We have the Fox News and the MSNBC, the right and the left. And this sort of, to me, there's like the right, the left, and then the one that's trying to be on the center, they're just making money, is CNN. They don't have a horse in the race. They're just like, we're not on the right or the left. We're just trying to make money being reporters. And it was really interesting to watch the vulnerability of some of these media outlets actually starting to go, you know what, let's listen to this guy and see what he has to say. Maybe he's not a joke. Maybe he's actually real. And it was a really interesting vulnerability in the media. And I think what made that happen was Andrew Yang called out MSNBC as liars and being just not an integrity. He just said, he called them out and said, listen, you need to apologize to me or I'm not coming on your network right now. I will in the future, but you have to apologize first. And that boundary that he set to the whole entire network really made a difference. I thought that was really powerful of a person to be strong enough to say, I don't need you. I built my own media network and I don't need you. And it scared the crap out of the media network. They're running scared right now. And the other networks are going, well, wait a second, we're not going to make the same mistake as that network. And it's a really interesting time of vulnerability in American media right now. And I'd like to see how this plays out. I don't know how it's going to, but it's interesting to watch groups of people say exactly what you just said, Stacey, is I don't know. We think we know, but we don't know. Let's find someone that does know, or let's have this conversation and figure it out together. Because that's the mistake that America made with Donald Trump, is they thought they knew what the reality was, but then after the election, it was a different reality. And so we're still reeling from not knowing that enough people would relate to a monster. We literally put a monster in power, a media-loving monster. So I think as a whole nation, that's one thing, but as a global society, we don't really know why China is doing the atrocities that they're doing and why they're running their country the way they're running it and what their 40-year, 50-year master plan is if we're not part of that culture. We don't get it. So we have to learn from that culture in order. I think Europeans are the neutral people of the world that have an older society that really understand things. And I think there's a balance in the world that has to come from all indigenous people knowing things that other cultures don't know, meaning in China, they actually burned their history. They started over. They literally took their entire history of their country and burned it. So we're going to have to figure out this whole thing together. And if we have to burn it down to do that, that would be such a shame. That's sorry, I'm ranting, but I'm so optimistic about people like an Elon Musk who says, I'm not in this for the money, I'm in this for the hope and change. And I'm going to give all the patents to all the technology for free to everybody. And a lot of the software companies in Silicon Valley are starting to take that same approach and realizing I'll make more money with open sourcing the software. And if we can open source the love for the Mother Earth, open source farming, open source conversations, like transparency is a must in a society that has unending information. If we're not if we're hiding our vulnerability, if we're hiding our power, our knowledge, if we're hiding information, that leads to a discourse of polarity and you're right, I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, as opposed to I don't know. I think if we can move into the I don't know phase of the world, then that opens up, well, someone knows, so let's listen to that person. And we can find those peoples and those cultures and those societies that do know, because I think Copenhagen in Denmark, they know environmental change because they started in 2008. So they're 12 years ahead of the rest of the world. They kind of know things. I wish Heiner was here because I would want to know, what did Denmark say at the COP25 conference? Because they've been doing this for so long. They must know things. And Ireland and Scotland is way ahead of the rest of the world too with renewable energies. Do people know who's leading this? Stacey, maybe you know. Maybe you can.
No, I don't know who's leading it, but what I wanted to say is you mentioned, working it and figuring out together. And I was just going to say, we don't do that at all. I mean, you mentioned the Elon Musk story. I put that on my webpage and it turned into, you would think that everybody would think exactly along the lines of what you said. However, people had other objections. The good thing is it turned into a conversation that actually moved somewhere. I invited you to hoping that you would go there to see the conversation. I'm going to see if I can get it to you. But my point is, if we don't understand the needs of the other people that are different from our needs, then we're not really working together. And I think oftentimes we try to solve problems without hearing from the people who are suffering from the problems what way would best serve them.
You're correct. So both of you are correct, I think. And the need to work together is growing day by day. The reason it's growing is because the methane bomb has gone off. That's one of the trigger points of global climate change, severe climate change. And so the need to unite and act together in unison to put pressure on legislation is never been more urgent, in my opinion.
I'd like to follow up on an idea that Josh introduced about vulnerability. I understand the story. It relates to something just happened a couple of days ago, which is this op-ed in Christianity Today calling for Trump's impeachment. So to me, even though you could say it's vulnerability, I would say it's a final admission of complicity, which doesn't feel so much as vulnerability. It's actually being called out and finally taking some look at your own principles and your own values. And finally saying, am I going to be a party line, follower, lemming, or am I really going to take these principles seriously? So you could put it either way. But the fact is, I was always in favor of impeaching as early as possible, because this kind of conversation doesn't happen unless you put it into the forefront, unless you put it into the conversation. And, for a year or more, there was this justification on the Democrat side of, oh, well, we're waiting for the right moment, or we're waiting for us to mass the number of votes in the Senate, so that we can actually successfully impeach and all that crap. And I would say, look, if you get it going, a number of people who otherwise would be treating every day as business as usual will be called onto carpet. In fact, onto the carpet of history, and say, are you going to be that guy, that 47th lemming, or are you going to take a stand and finally go against your own party because the Constitution actually means something to you personally and to your family and to your neighbors? So that conversation gets started when you start that process. So waiting to say, oh, well, we're not going to start until we have the necessary votes is your own trap of the Democrats. So anyway, I'm clear that this conversation had to happen. And in fact, this conversation had to happen the moment Trump was elected. It had to happen even the moment that the Republicans took him seriously as a candidate, as appalling as that is. So anyway, that's why I was not so comfortable using the word vulnerability in that situation, as I am just finally getting fed up with people just suppressing their own values and principles in favor of power, in favor of office. And that has to end at some point. And we're seeing the chinks of that, especially with this Christianity Today op-ed. It is a crucial, crucial step. Understandably, it's only one op-ed, but it's in Christianity Today. Over.
There is a sidebar to that story that I think is really illustrative of what you're talking about. Apparently, after it came out, their servers melted down. Like they had a major crash. And the editor did not expect, if they had 400 or 500 people in a day, that was a lot. And a peak article might draw 4,000 or 5,000. And they had 19,000 people just swamp their servers. And the vast bulk of those people were people saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Been waiting so long for somebody to speak to the values and the absence of values of this president, and like where are our, and this is, by the way, folks, this is not just Christianity Today, this is a major evangelical organ that was founded by Billy Graham way back in the day. So this is the belly of the Trump supporter beast, coming up and saying he needs to be removed from office, which was a major change. But it's that there is that piece of the, the frog getting boiled alive because the change in temperature is so incrementally slow. And how long does it take for somebody to get to enough is enough, and then have the courage in the face of everybody else and nobody looking around to the left and the right and nobody saying anything. And so those initial expressions of courage, nobody else is saying anything, but I know I have to say something. We went through the same thing with the McCarthy era, and how far he got down the road at branding people communists and stealing their lives and triggering discrimination, all sorts of insane shit for a very long period of time before somebody said, shame on you, it's enough. And the jig was up. So it's almost a cultural scale blocking, isn't it? Where, people find themselves blocked or stopped from stepping up or giving their voice or expressing their rejection. And it's a really tough thing. And the people that have stuck their heads out, have been on the receiving end of some really horrendous harassment. I don't judge how long this has taken, but I'm very thankful for the signs of light that are beginning to punch through. It's 12:55. I want to be respectful of people's time. So we are going to try to stop at the top of the hour. And Amanda, welcome. Dove, welcome. And if you folks want to check in just so we can hear your voice, you're welcome to do that. Or check in and check out. I'm complete.
I was just curious, so I know it's late, but I just check in and see what's happening.
Okay, 10 seconds more. The candidate that understands that the media has been manipulative has been Bernie, and even the media is now understanding and saying, yes, we've been ignoring Bernie. But he's actually taking the higher road and saying, I got my people. I got my $18 from millions and millions and millions, okay? I'm not taking it from billionaires, and I have my own news sources, my own network, taking pictures of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that show up that are bigger than those Trump crowds. So the media is going to render themselves useless and irrelevant if they're not going to hold to their own principles of what, was supposed to be the fourth estate. They're completely irresponsible and abdicating that responsibility. So they don't deserve the respect until they recover. I'm out.
So, do you hear me? Okay, so I'll check in. Hello, it's Dov. Just hearing you, and I don't even know what sort of conversation I jumped into. One thought I have about the topic that I hear now is how much I think from seeing all of this outside, that we Democrats, can I say, don't respect the other side's need and feel. Like, I guess that most of the people who are Trump supporters know at some place where he is, know that he's immoral, know that he's, all the things that we do, and still they vote for him. Why? How can we respect that? Like, that's one question that is going on in my mind. Thanks a lot. Check out.
That ties into my 2 cents, so this will be my checkout. With the theme of words, I really think it's important, and I've started referring to people as Trump defenders instead of Trump supporters, because at this point, I mean, for a lot of reasons, I don't have to go into it, but I feel sure that it is a positive step to refer to them as Trump defenders as opposed to supporters. And with that, I'm complete.
I'm going to check out, but I just want to say I find it really, what's the word? Disturbing how much people talk about this situation in America as though it's real. And you sort of look to finding some hope in it, and you look to coming, moving things like moving pawns on a checkboard. What I don't get is the understanding that this whole system is corrupt and rigged. And why are we even bothering to talk about it? Because, sorry, it is really irrelevant to the reality of what is actually happening. And so I'm sort of disappointed that the consciousness, which could really think about, what life is about, gets sidetracked into these polarities and talks about the possibility of there being hope there, when in fact this is just taking us to a rubbish dump. So that's my 2 cents worth. And I really enjoyed today's discussion.
Josh?
Yeah, thanks for saying that. This discussion brings up for me, and this is my check out, is the word necessary evil. And is it actually necessary to have a monster or to have an enemy or to have an evil? So in all stories throughout humanity, the way to group people together is to find an enemy, and that unites us all. And the other story in humanity is to find a deity or a beautiful light and unite around that. And so some of the major religions in the world were united around an idea of a God that loves us and is here for us all. But a lot of wars were started. I was talking to my mom about this. Like, why did we go to Vietnam? Why did we even have a Second World War? And then I remembered after I asked the question, because there was a false flag attack. All of those things was a fake evil perpetrated on the people by the same people that were the savior of that evil. So if we can change that narrative, we can change our consciousness every time there's an evil in the world, to stop and go, wait a second, who created this monster? Oh, we did ourselves. And that goes back to the individual to look at, why am I so angry at this person that doesn't remember the thing that's causing all this evil? Oh, it's their demons. Oh, I have demons. If I didn't have demons, then I wouldn't get so angry, but I have my own demons and they're triggering my demons. So I feel that my checkout is for unblocking is to look deep at your own demons and just ask, are you feeding them or are you starving them? And with that, I'm complete.
Okay, I'll check out simply with Gandhi quote. He said, you have to be the change you want to see in the world. And I think that applies to the way I relate to the situation in the United States. Everything that's real is real, and everything that's false is not a miracle. Hold on.
Yes?
Fascinating, superb. There is the Stockholm syndrome theory, and probably a fact that's going around. It does beg the question, okay, we understand the situation, we deplore the situation, but that does not mean to say that millions and possibly billions of people on this planet are at the same level of understanding. Now, I do keep saying that we all understand anything and everything according to our level of understanding, whether it be judgmental or not, whether it makes sense to us or not, it makes sense to the person who has that understanding, who holds Trump, Boris, Modi, and others of that ilk at the level that they hold them. And they do believe that these people will take them to where they have promised to take them. That Mr. Trump will deliver America as a great nation again, where those people who have voted for him will be able to hold their head up high and live in the fashion that they deem that they deserve to live at or have lived at previously. And that may be a sickness, or it may be whatever we want to call it. We want to give it a name. It's not as probably as deep as the Stockholm syndrome, but it's getting there. How are we, for the majority of those that who are a little bit above that, going to talk with them to get them out of this PTSD situation? I'm complete. Thanks for the superb conversation. It was fascinating listening. Thank you, Anna. I'll come back to you next week.
So it brings us to the end of another unblocking. We covered a lot of ground today. Almost a little overwhelming. But I keep getting this feeling that we're circling something that shall remain as yet unnamed and undefined and unexpressed, but that where the circles are getting tighter, more and more concentric, and the ingredients, the sort of recurring themes and ingredients are beginning to crystallize. And I hold out hope. I think we're going to get to something fundamental in all this. And thank you all for being here and for co-creating it. And Dove and Amanda, thanks for popping in. And we start 11 a.m. Eastern U.S. time. That's our normal start time. And run for 2 hours every Sunday. And needless to say, you're always welcome. And with that, enjoy all your Sundays and what remains of your Sundays. And Alex, what remains of your Monday. And may you stay cool, Alex, in Australia, and fire free. Bye all.
I just wanted to say real quick, just to remember what Sam said earlier in the conversation is when we're circling to root down. That's what Sam said. When we're circling,
think
root
down. Think down, he said.
Think. In Tai Chi, it's called rooting. And the first thing you do is you plug into the earth so that you can move your hand to the stars, and you're a conduit in between the yin and the yang. But that rooting, that's what will stop the circling, or that's actually what will allow the circling to have roots. So I just want to say, as a group, we're learning to root. We're circling, but then we have to find an anchor, roots.
Yeah, the intriguing thing, Josh, is the idea that we define a center point, a center of gravity that isn't necessarily tied or based or dependent on a root. And that's almost more interesting to me because I think we're the center of gravity. It actually isn't something apart from us. But I'll leave that for next Sunday. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you. Cheers.
Goodbye.
Cheers. Do you feel rooted, Joss Winder?
Yeah, I'm rooted.
Okay. Checking
Sam
in.
is the host and he's not here, so we can't turn it off.
Okay. Well, it was a good conversation. It was really nice.
Yep.
Good to see everybody.
Uh,
Bye-bye.